She had once been a warrior of legends. Her name was spoken in the halls of power, whispered in the markets, and feared on the battlefield. But now, that name no longer existed. It had been erased, burned away from the records, forbidden from every tongue. She was nothing but a shadow, a dishonored exile wandering the wastelands. They had stripped her armor in front of the people. They cut her long hair, each strand falling to the ground like broken pride. Her symbols of rank were torn from her chest, and her blade, her most sacred possession, was taken. The blade was more than a weapon. It was her life, her oath, her history. Without it, she felt hollow. Her people spat on her as she was cast out. They told her she was no longer worthy of honor, no longer worthy of her name. For many moons, she wandered alone. The wastelands were cold and cruel, filled with scavengers and hunters. She survived by instinct, but her spirit weakened day by day. Every night, she dreamed of her blade, of the battles she once fought. And every morning, she woke with empty hands. One night, she sat by the ruins of an old fortress. Her eyes were tired, her body scarred. She whispered to herself, though no one could hear, "They took everything from me, what is left now?" But then she heard footsteps, soft at first, then closer, steady, cautious. Her heart raced. Was it another hunter, another enemy come to finish what her people had begun? She reached for a sharp stone, the only weapon she had left. But the figure that appeared was not one of her kind. It was a human, tall, with worn armor and tired eyes. He looked at her not with hatred, not with disgust, but with something she had not seen in years: curiosity. He lowered his weapon, as if to show he meant no harm. She hissed at him, warning him to leave. "Go away, stranger. I am nothing. I am no one." But the human did not leave. He studied her, the broken warrior with cut hair and empty hands. He seemed to see more than what she was now. Perhaps he saw what she had been, or what she still could be, and then he reached behind him. When his hand came forward, she froze, her breath catching in her throat. In his hand was a blade, not just any blade, her blade, the one they had stolen, the one tied to her soul. The edge glimmered faintly in the moonlight, though it was scarred from use. Her heart pounded, her body trembled. She whispered, How do you have this?" The human's voice was calm, steady. "I found it in the hands of raiders. They did not deserve it, but when I saw it, I knew it was not theirs. I knew it belonged to someone greater." Tears burned her eyes, though she had sworn never to cry again. She reached for the blade, her fingers shaking as if afraid it would vanish like a dream. The weight of it in her hands was heavy, familiar, alive. Her chest rose and fell with a sharp breath. For the first time since her exile, she felt whole again. But she also felt something else: confusion. Why would a human return a blade? Her people had told her humans were weak, foolish, unworthy of respect. Yet this one stood before her, offering not pity, not cruelty, but respect. She wanted to ask his name, but the words would not come. Her pride and her shame fought inside her. Instead, she held the blade close, pressing it to her chest. Memories of her battles, her victories, and her fall all surged within her. The fire in her eyes, once dim, began to burn again. The human spoke once more, his voice quiet but strong. "You are not no one. I don't know your name, but I know you are not nothing. Warriors do not disappear because others try to erase them. Warriors remain, as long as they choose to fight." His words cut deeper than any weapon. For years, she had believed the lies of her enemies. But in that moment, with her blade returned and a stranger's faith placed upon her, something changed. She lifted the weapon, testing its balance. The sound of metal against the wind was like a forgotten song. Her hands steadied, her stance straightened. For the first time in years, she stood not as an exile, but as a warrior. She looked at the human with narrowed eyes. "You do not know me. You do not know what I have lost." The human only nodded. "Then show me. Show me who you are." The fire of her honor, once buried under shame, began to rise again. The wastelands around them seemed less silent, less empty. The night carried the promise of something greater, and in her heart, she knew this was not the end of her story. This was the beginning. The warrior sat in silence, the blade resting across her knees. The firelight flickered against its edge, and in that glow, she felt both comfort and unease. It was hers again, yet it did not erase the shame of her fall. Her enemies had taken her honor, and a human, of all creatures, had returned the weapon that was supposed to define her. She looked at him through narrowed eyes, studying his face. His armor was battered, scarred from battles, but not like the shining armor her people wore. This was armor meant for survival, patched and repaired with rough hands. He did not carry himself with the pride of a noble soldier, yet there was a strength in him, a quiet defiance she could not ignore. "You should not have come here," she finally said, her voice sharp. "Humans do not belong in this land. You are weak, you will die." The human did not flinch, he only shrugged, his eyes fixed on the flames. "Maybe, but weakness is not leaving someone broken when you can help them." The words struck her harder than any blade. Help! It was something she had not heard in years. Her people had cast her aside, called her worthless, erased her name. And yet here was this outsider, daring to sit with her, daring to see her as more than nothing. Still, she pushed him away. "I don't need you. I don't need anyone," she hissed, gripping her blade as if the steel itself could shield her heart. But the human only leaned back, as if her anger did not matter. "Then keep your distance, warrior, but know this. I will not call you nothing, even if you do." She froze, her chest tightening. Warrior. He had called her what no one else dared. Her people had forbidden her name, stripped her of every title. Yet in that moment, with a single word, the human lit a spark deep inside her. It was small, fragile, but it burned. The days that followed tested them both. She tried to leave him behind, vanishing into the wastelands. But each time, somehow, he found her again. He moved with stubbornness, refusing to quit, even when hunger gnawed at him or storms tore across the desert sky. At first, she thought he followed her out of pity, but slowly she saw something else. He followed because he believed in her, even when she did not believe in herself. Once, when scavengers attacked in the dead of night, she fought with wild fury, her blade flashing. But her strength faltered, her body still scarred from exile. When one of the raiders aimed to strike to finish her, the human stepped in. His shield caught the blow, his arm bled, yet he did not fall. He stood like an unshaken wall, and for a brief moment, she saw what made humans different. They did not fight for glory. They did not fight for ritual. They fought because they chose to, because they refused to let those beside them fall. That choice, that defiance, it was something her people had never understood, and it unsettled her. Later, as she cleaned the blood from her blade, the human sat nearby, wrapping his wound. "You risked your life," she said coldly. "Why?" He looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because you're not done yet. You may have been cast out, but I see the fire still in you. You can still rise, you just forgot how." She turned away, but the words echoed inside her like a battle drum. Each night after, she found herself watching him more closely. The way he spoke, the way he carried himself, the way he never called her broken. He did not fear her silence, nor her anger. Instead, he gave her something no exile was ever meant to have: respect. And slowly, against her will, the spark inside her grew. We called her by the name she thought lost forever. Her heart nearly stopped. The word had not been spoken in so long. She had almost forgotten the sound of it. But when a human spoke it, it was not as an insult, not as a curse. He spoke it as if it still belonged to her, as if she was still worthy. For the first time in years, she whispered back, almost too soft to hear, "Yes, that is who I am." And the fire in her chest, once thought dead, began to blaze. The human had not only returned her blade, he had returned her name, her pride, her first spark of hope. And deep inside, she knew the path ahead would no longer be one of silence and exile. It would be one of defiance, and this time she would not walk it alone. The wastelands carried many secrets, and one of them was whispers. News traveled faster than wind, faster than shadow. It spread in broken voices across ruined camps and hidden caves. They say the fallen warrior walks again, and at her side, a human. The warrior felt those eyes on her when she walked through the ruins. Eyes of outcasts, exiles, and rebels who had nothing left but ashes. They stared at her blade, at the fire slowly returning to her step. Some remembered her from before, from the days when she was untouchable. Others saw only the stranger beside her, the human who carried no fear. At first, she tried to silence the whispers. "I'm not your hope. I'm not your leader," she told them. But the words did not matter. The symbol of her blade mattered more, and the fact that she still carried it after dishonor, after exile, gave them something they had lost long ago. Belief. The human noticed it before she did. "They follow you," he said one night as they sat near the dying fire. "They look at you as if you were a flame in the dark." She shook her head, gripping the hilt of her blade. "I cannot lead them. I am broken." But he only gave her that same calm look. "Maybe, but broken things can cut just as sharp, sometimes sharper." The days grew harsher. Ambushes came more often, not from scavengers this time, but from trained hunters. Her old people had heard of her return, and they feared it. They sent blades and assassins to end the rumor before it became a rebellion. Each fight reminded her how far she had fallen. Her movements slower, her strength not as it once was. Yet the human fought at her side, steady, unyielding. He had no training in her people's style, but his instincts were fierce. Where she faltered, he held the line. One night, after barely escaping an ambush, she sat on the rocks, her body trembling with rage. "This is madness. They want me dead, and they will kill you too." The human sat beside her, his breathing heavy, but his eyes alive. "Then let them come. Let them see that exile does not mean silence. Let them see that a warrior can rise again." Her heart burned at his words, but doubt still weighed heavy. Until the next day, when a group of rebels approached. They were scarred, hungry, desperate, but their leader, a scarred woman, bowed before her. "You were cast out, but you still carry your blade. If you can stand, so can we." The warrior wanted to turn away, to tell them she was not who they thought. But when she looked at the human, she saw the truth in his eyes. It was not about her pride anymore. It was about something greater. That night, for the first time since her exile, she trained again. Not alone, not in silence, but with the human at her side, showing her strange techniques. His style was different, rough, direct, born of survival instead of ceremony. At first she laughed at it, calling it clumsy. But when his blade cut past her defense and touched her shoulder, her laughter died. She realized his way had strength too, strength her people had never valued. Together, they blended their ways. Her discipline, his defiance. Her precision, his unpredictability. It was something new, something dangerous. And as they trained, the whispers grew louder. More rebels came, more outcasts followed. They did not care about her shame. They cared about the fire in her eyes, the human at her side, and the promise of defiance against those who had crushed them. But her enemies also listened. In the halls of power, her name was spoken again, not in honor, but in fear. The exile rises with a human, they spat. She must be ended before she gathers an army. And so the storm began to build. The warrior stood at the edge of something greater than herself. Her honor had been stolen, her pride erased, her name forbidden. But now, in the eyes of rebels and in the heart of one human, she was becoming something new. Not just a fallen warrior, but a spark that could ignite a fire across the wastelands. And deep within, for the first time since her fall, she wondered, maybe this was not about reclaiming her old life. Maybe this was about building a new one, with steel, with fire, and with a human who refused to let her fade into dust. The night was heavy with silence, yet danger moved within it. The warrior and the human had been traveling with a small band of rebels for many days. Their numbers grew, but so did the threat against them. Every step forward was shadowed by hunters sent to kill her and crush any spark of resistance. That night, the ambush came. Dozens of armored soldiers descended upon the camp, blades flashing, voices shouting. The rebels fought with desperation, but they were not soldiers, they were broken survivors. Steel met steel, fire burned, and the wastelands echoed with the cries of battle. The warrior fought with all the strength she had regained. Her blade carved through the dark, her movements sharp and precise. But the enemy was many, and her body still bore the scars of exile. For every foe she cut down, another rose in their place. Her arms trembled, her breath came heavy. She was strong, but not invincible. Then the moment came. A soldier's strike slipped past her guard, a killing blow aimed at her chest. She braced for the end, but it never came. The human stepped between them, his shield shattering under the force, his body taking the strike. Blood poured down his side, yet he did not fall. With a roar, he drove his blade into the attacker, refusing to let her die. Her heart stopped, rage flooding her veins. "No," she cried, her voice shaking the night. She cut down the enemies around her with a fury she had not felt in years. Each strike was faster, harder, burning with something more than survival. It was not just for her honor anymore. It was for him, the human who bled for her, the human who had stood where no one else had. The rebels rallied at her side. With every enemy that fell, they shouted her name, the name once forbidden. The sound of it tore through the night like thunder. The warrior was no longer forgotten, no longer erased. She was reborn in blood and fire. When the battle ended, the ground was littered with bodies. The rebels stood shaking, scarred but alive, and the human lay against the stones, blood soaking his armor, his breath ragged. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. "You fool," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this for me?" His lips curved into a weak smile. "Because warriors do not fight alone," he whispered. "Because I chose you." Tears she had long buried rose in her eyes. No one had ever said those words to her. Not her people, not her leaders. All her life, she had been told she fought for glory, for duty, for honor. But here was a human who had nearly died, not for glory, but for her, for who she was, even broken, even exiled. That night, under the shattered sky, she made her choice. She pressed her blade into the earth before him and lowered her head. "I swear my oath to you," she whispered, her voice strong though her heart shook. "I am bound to your survival. Your fight is my fight. Your life is my life. Until my last breath, I stand with you." The rebels around them fell silent, watching as their fallen warrior pledged herself to a human. In that moment, something unshakable was born. Not just loyalty, not just alliance, but a bond forged in fire and blood. She was no longer in exile, no longer a broken shadow. She was a warrior with a cause, and the human was at the heart of it. The human, weak but alive, placed his hand over hers. "Then together," he said, his voice steady despite the pain, "together we rise." And with that oath, the wastelands shifted. A new fire spread among the rebels. They no longer saw her as just a symbol. They saw her as their leader, and him as the strength behind her. The exile and the human, bound not by blood but by choice, stood at the beginning of something greater than either of them alone. But far away, in the cities of her people, their leaders trembled with fear. For the whispers had grown too loud, the fire too bright. The fallen warrior was no longer fallen. She was rising, and she was not rising alone. The oath changed everything. From that night onward, the warrior no longer walked as an exile. She walked as a leader, her blade shining once more, her voice carrying weight. The rebels who once hid in shadows now followed her openly, their eyes burning with hope. And at her side, the human stood, wounded but unbroken, his presence steady as the storm that gathered around them. Word spread across the wastelands. Villages whispered of the dishonored warrior who had risen again. Caravans carried tales of the human who bled for her and lived. Every story grew larger, brighter, until the legend could not be ignored. The exiled, the forgotten, the betrayed, they all came. One by one, they joined her, not because of duty, but because they saw someone who would not bow, someone who had fallen and still rose. Each campfire became a place of training. The warrior taught them discipline, the art of precision, the honor of the blade. The human taught them survival, the raw instinct to fight with whatever remained. Together, they forged something new, not her way, not his way, but their way, a storm born of two worlds. At first, the rebel army was small, but numbers grew quickly. They were not polished soldiers, they were broken shards. Yet when shards come together, they cut sharper than any single blade. The warrior felt her pride return piece by piece. Not the pride her people had once demanded, but a pride of choice. She was not fighting to please her old masters. She was fighting for those who had been silenced, for those who had nothing. And each time she lifted her blade, the human's eyes reminded her why she still stood. But far away, in the shining halls of her people, fear turned to fury. Leaders who once mocked her name now shouted it in anger. She gathers an army of traitors. They spat. She defiles herself with a human. They sent spies, assassins, and soldiers. Yet none could stop the tide that was rising. The storm grew louder. Her army struck supply lines, raided outposts, freed prisoners who had been cast away like her. Every victory made the whispers roar louder. And with each clash, more joined their cause. The warriors saw it in their eyes. They were not following her name, they were following her fight. And at the center of it all, the human walked like a flame that refused to be put out. Still, doubt haunted her. At night, when the fire dimmed, she would sit alone, staring at her blade. This path, it will end in blood, she whispered. The human would sit beside her, silent at first, then steady. Then let it end in blood, he said, but let it be their blood, not yours, not ours. We fight because no one else will. His words carved into her like stone. Slowly, she began to believe not just in herself, but in them, in the two of them together. Her people had thought exile would break her. Instead, it had rebuilt her stronger, sharper, and tied to something they could never understand. Choice. And so the storm rose higher. The wastelands no longer whispered her name. They shouted it. Her enemies tried to crush her, but each strike only made her stronger. Her army, once scattered rebels, now moved as one. A storm of defiance ready to fall upon the world that had cast her aside. And deep within, the warrior knew the truth. This was no longer about regaining her lost honor. This was about tearing apart the chains her people had placed on countless others. This was about proving that even when stripped, shamed, and erased, one could rise again. And beside her, always, the human reminded her that her blade was not just a weapon. It was a promise. The storm was no longer coming. The storm had arrived. The storm had grown too large to ignore. For weeks the rebels struck with precision, cutting deeper into enemy lands. Villages rose in open defiance. Prisoners escaped their chains. Banners once forbidden now burned bright in the night. Her people could no longer call it rumor. It was rebellion. And at its heart stood the exile, blade in hand, a human at her side. The response came like thunder. An army marched from the shining cities, armored legions that once had cheered her name. They came to crush her fire, to scatter the rebels back into dust. At their head rode the one who had stripped her honor, the commander who had cut her hair, erased her name, and cast her into silence. His eyes carried no fear, only contempt. To fight your own kind beside a human, he shouted across the battlefield. You are lower than nothing. Her grip tightened around her blade. Once his words would have broken her, but no longer. She looked at the human standing beside her, his shield scarred, his stance unyielding. And she answered, her voice carrying across the winds. I was nothing when I obeyed you. I'm everything now that I fight against you." The battle began. Steel clashed, fire roared, and the wasteland shook under the weight of war. Rebels fought with wild fury. Soldiers pressed with iron discipline. The warrior cut through lines of enemies, her blade flashing like lightning. Each strike carried years of rage, years of silence now unleashed in fire. The human fought as though the earth itself pushed him forward. His shield battered aside strikes. His sword drove into armored foes. Where others would have fallen, he stood, bleeding but relentless. The rebels took strength from his defiance, rising each time he refused to fall. But the storm was heavy. The rebel lines began to buckle, pressed by soldiers who had trained their entire lives. Bodies fell, flames consumed the field, the night filled with smoke and ash. And then, through the chaos, she saw him, the commander, the one who had broken her, waiting with blade in hand. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to fade until only the two of them remained. She advanced, fury in every step. Their blades clashed with a force that echoed above the noise of battle. He fought with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. But she fought with something greater, the weight of every exile, every rebel, every broken voice that now shouted her name. Strike after strike, their weapons rang like thunder. He sneered, "You are still the same, still the weak girl I cast out." Her blade met his, sparks flying. "No," she roared, "I am more than you ever allowed me to be." The fight dragged on, each blow heavier, each movement slower. The human cut his way through the field to reach her side, but she lifted a hand, stopping him. "This is mine," she said, her eyes never leaving her enemy. And in that moment, she stood taller than she ever had. At last, the chance came. His strike faltered, his arrogance leaving an opening. She drove her blade forward, cutting through his defense, forcing him to his knees. The battlefield stilled as soldiers and rebels alike watched. The exile they had once spat upon now stood over her enemy, her blade at his throat. She could have killed him, ended him with one strike. But instead, she raised her voice so all could hear. "You erased my name, but tonight I take it back." And with fire burning in her chest, she spoke her name aloud, the name forbidden, the name once lost. The sound of it tore through the smoke and ash like lightning. Rebels cried it out. Soldiers trembled as it spread across the battlefield. Her name lived again, stronger than ever. She lowered her blade, sparing the commander not out of mercy, but to show him and all the world that he no longer held power over her. Her honor was not his to give or take. It was hers, and hers alone. The battle turned. The rebels surged with renewed strength, shouting her name, fighting with fire in their hearts. The enemy, shaken, began to break. By dawn, the wastelands lay quiet, the battlefield covered in fire and ash, but victory was theirs. The warrior stood at the center, her blade raised high, her name reborn in every voice that called to her. And at her side stood the human, bloodied but unbroken, the one who had given her more than a weapon. He had given her back herself. The battlefield lay in silence. Ash drifted through the air, the stench of fire and blood clinging to the ground. Where once an army had stood, now only broken shields and scattered banners remained. The rebels had won, but victory carried a heavy price. Too many lay among the fallen, their bodies never to rise again. The warrior walked through the wreckage, her blade still stained. Each step felt heavy, yet her chest burned with something she had not felt in years: freedom. She had spoken her true name, and the wastelands had answered. No one could erase it again, not her enemies, not her people, not even time. At the edge of the battlefield, the human stood waiting, his armor cracked, his body marked by countless wounds. But his eyes still carried the same fire that had guided her from the shadows of exile. When she approached, he gave her a tired smile. "You have it back," he said softly. "Your name, your honor." She looked at her blade, then back at him. "No," she whispered. I have more than that. I have myself. Her people had once told her honor came from titles, from rituals, from the approval of leaders. But she now knew they were wrong. Honor was not something given, it was something chosen. And she had chosen to fight, to rise, to lead. The rebels gathered around her, their eyes bright despite their scars. To them, she was no longer the exile, no longer the fallen. She was their leader, their flame, their proof that even the broken could rise again. But she did not stand above them. She stood among them, one of them, and the human beside her was part of that fire, part of that strength. Later, when the fires died down, she sat with him on the ruins of a shattered wall. The night was quiet, only the crackle of embers breaking the silence. She held her blade across her knees, staring at its edge. This weapon was once my pride, she said, her voice calm. It was taken, and I believe my life was over, but you returned it, not just the steel, but what it meant. You reminded me that I am more than what they tried to erase. The human leaned back, his gaze on the stars above. I only gave back what was already yours, he said. You carried that fire all along. You just needed someone to see it. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wastelands that once felt empty now felt alive. The silence was not one of exile, but of peace. When dawn came, the rebels began to rebuild. They buried the fallen, raised new shelters, and forged a new banner. Not the banner of her old people, but one born from ashes and choice. She walked among them, not as a distant figure, but as a leader whose scars matched theirs. Everywhere she went, voices whispered her name with pride. Her name, once forbidden, was now a song of freedom. But she knew the fight was not over. Her old people still ruled in their shining cities, still bound others in chains. The battle had been won, but the war for freedom stretched far beyond the wastelands. And for the first time, she did not dread it, for she would not face it alone. That evening, she turned to the human, her voice steady. Stay with me. The road ahead is long, but I would not walk it without you. He met her gaze, tired yet unshaken. You never will, he answered. She lifted her blade high, the steel catching the first light of morning. The rebels cheered, their voices rising like thunder across the ruined land. The warrior closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the weapon in her hands. It was no longer just a symbol of duty, no longer a reminder of what was taken. It was her promise to fight, to lead, to never bow again. Her honor had been stripped, her pride shaved away, her name erased. But the human had returned her blade, and with it, she had forged something greater than honor. She had forged freedom. The storm had passed, but its fire would never die. And as long as she carried her blade, as long as the human walked beside her, no chain, no enemy, no silence would ever erase her again.